Yeah, before we jump into the specifics, there's a couple of well, I got to do a little bit of homework first. If we are going to share this as a recorded artifact for the Agitare community, I'm going to do the intro to Agitare so that people are tracking what this is because I have to constantly remind people what that is. I got my Agitare shirt on right now.
Nice.
Yeah. Um, so and then who I am and what we're doing here. And then we're gonna go in a rough order in this conversation just to make sure that we're all on the same page because there's some hurdles I think that we have to overcome with the
Okay.
way that people receive this, the concept of strategy at the tactical level. So, uh, yeah, Agitare is a community of practice for facilitation and sense making. The the initial push for it was in the domain of like innovation, right? So it was a group of us who were using facilitation as a technique to kind of enable those around us to be, to make sense of what opportunities there were to deviate from the status quo. So there's a lot of techniques that can go into that. There's, sprints and design thinking, um, and there's agile methods. There's liberating structures. There's a really wide variety of techniques that can be used. And one thing that we wanted to do was give people the sense that the best facilitators are multifaceted. There is no one magic bullet to solve all of the problems. Which tools you apply in whatever circumstance depends entirely on who you as a facilitator and the context that you're facing. So it was like, let's, create opportunities for peer learning within the community of practice. I was not familiar with a lot of communities of practice within the Air Force that actually served that function of peer learning. Um, the opportunity to experiment and fail and share what had worked and bring people into collaborative efforts and stuff like that. Not to mention that all this stuff kind of falls outside of everybody's job, like our
Yeah.
AFSCs, right? So um, I was a linguist, got into the innovation space, stood up a community of practice because I felt like we needed it, because I had this vision of people becoming facilitators within their own environments, and activating everybody around them, because that was, rather than focusing on being the innovators themselves or the sense makers themselves, they were just helping everybody around them become, capable of that through social technologies and activities and such. So that's Agitare. Um,
I like it.
the yeah, it has been more active at times and more quiet at times. And just entirely depending on the demand signal. So, people get drawn, their energy gets drawn back to their job, and then it's like the community will be quiet, and there will be sort of a steady drumbeat of activity on Slack. And we won't have activity like live synchronous events like this for a while. Although we did just have one a few days ago, which might be why nobody's showing up to this one. Could also be because it's on a Sunday. It's tough to say. So, but if, for anybody who's interested in seeing like people, not just in the Air Force, not even just in the DoD, we got members from academia and across the world, who are engaged in these questions of how we can enable sense making, because it doesn't have to be Air Force only or Space Force only or even military or DoD or government or US only to be helpful. So it's a pretty broad community. Um, so today I kind of started pushing um, content based on the idea that I have thought for a long time that nobody at the tactical, particularly enlisted folks at the tactical level, flight chiefs are a really good example, in the Air Force, which is people who lead a flight of, of maybe dozens of people. They don't feel like strategy is their job. Like they think that their job is execution, and execution is different from strategy. And I've had this sense for a really long time. Been in the Air Force for 18 and a half years. And the impression that I continue to get is that, below the ranks of E89, uh, people don't think it's their job to decide what the best next step is. They think it's their job to be told what the next step is and simply to execute it. And that's an attitude that has always really frustrated me.
Yeah.
I think that goes all the way down to the example of an airman in a finance squadron who is met with a situation that is not in their training or is not in their, you know, their list of tasks that they are expected to carry out, or the ways in which they're expected to carry them out. I think there's a real not my job ethos, right? Where people don't have what is the value that I'm intended to bring here in mind. They just have, here's my list of tasks. Does this fit into that list of tasks? If not, not my job. Sorry, go find somebody else. I've encountered this a lot in the Air Force. It is, I think it's a pervasive attitude. And I would say that's like the same as flight chiefs who think that it's their job to simply execute the strategy of their unit commanders. And I'd say it's the same as unit commanders who think it's their job to execute the strategy of wing commanders. And I think that this whole paradigm is flawed fundamentally, right? So I started pushing content that was like, what if we started thinking in terms of Air Force Doctrine 1-1 Mission Command? And we actually thought, even down to the lowest level, everybody has a certain degree of command space, of decision space, every single person, because we can't all just have all of our actions dictated. So we have to be able to do sense making and like decide what the next best action is. And that activity where you're like, what are my resources? What's the situation? How am I going to allocate effort? That's strategy, no matter how high or low in the hierarchy it is. So that's why Toga and I decided to do this. Toga was unfortunately came down ill, and we're going to do another event with him, but I'm glad that he pulled y'all in. So that's my quick, maybe not so quick summary of why we're here.
No, it's, I mean, everything that you said, I mean, you say a lot. You definitely write a lot more eloquently than I can. But a lot of the stuff that you're saying is literally the space that I've been living in. I'm right there with you, about 17 years in. The DJ posted in chat here, and this is why Best kind of came to life. He wrote on in a lot of his like white papers and articles that Best in Ascend was pretty much there for, it's the essential strategic leadership competencies and how to bridge the gap between not only the strategic vision, but then to the practical execution. Um, it's interesting because like grassroots communities of interest and facilitation and collaboration and multifaceted competency based individuals is what I've been focusing on, not only as a career field manager, and how we go forth with the intelligence career field in the Space Force, but when I look at digital spaces, what I used in my thesis was a model that I created called the CATSI model. It's based off of the four pillars of decision advantage, which is collection, anticipation, transmission, and counterintelligence. That's how you gain decision advantage, and how some countries who shouldn't win wars and battles win when they shouldn't, and so forth, was because they basically optimized those four pillars better than their adversary. I got a lot of that from Jennifer E. Sims. She's an amazing book. She's the one that kind of coined the term decision advantage. And her most recent book is what I used predominantly for my thesis.
What's the
But
book?
that's what the book is, Decision Advantage. Here it is.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's decision advantage, intelligence, and international politics from the Spanish Armada to cyber war, Jennifer E. Sims. I mean, I can't recommend this book anymore. And I'm sure my thesis chair from 2 years ago now, she's like, you are definitely a decision advantage fanboy. Like, yeah, it's like I loved it. I spent a lot of time in the space. But that's kind of what you're saying when how you take what the I know there was a few papers a while ago that I read from the Army is like how do you avoid the strategic corporal?
Hmm.
um, but now, like especially in the space domain, the tactical implications and the tactical things that our guardians are doing and even our airmen, um, they affect very strategic things when you start talking about whatever those levels are. However you define strategic, operational, and tactical. I mean, it can mean multiple different things to different people, especially when you start talking about warning issues. What really is the difference between strategic warning and operational warning?
Yeah.
When you really break it down.
So this was
Um,
something that I faced when I started talking about this, that I think is the first hurdle we need to get over. One was defining strategy because, oh man, Ethan Eagle's here.
oh no, not Ethan.
Okay, it's Ethan. Okay, Dr. Eagle's in the room. We all have to button up. Um,
Ouch.
I'm having
so,
flashbacks to Mercury now.
so one of the first things that I encountered was this, and I continue to encounter it a lot, is when I bring up the subject of um, sense making and, analyzing your environment, having awareness about that environment, your capacities, your goals, and then allocating, focusing energy, resources, people, time to achieve those outcomes, deciding what to do and what not to do, that being strategy at any scale, is how I define it, right? And um, we have to get over the origins of the word strategy in order to think of it that way, because strategy originated. Austin Wiggins told me this morning as I was talking. I was playing Overwatch with Austin, and Austin was like, "You're gonna have an uphill battle there because the word strategy comes from warfare, and it is the decision making of generals. The Greek word that it originates from is just the word for general. So generals are the ones who
Huh,
engage in strategy. I
didn't
didn't
know
know
that.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So I was familiar. I have learned most about strategy from the corporate sector. With like people have written books. I got a stack of books. I just grabbed them off my shelf. I was like, how many of my books are about strategy? I got the Fifth Discipline, Scrum, Wardley Maps, Cynefin, Team of Teams, The Goal, um, all of the like the Fifth Discipline. All this stuff is about strategy within the corporate sector, but a lot of it draws from military traditions of strategy. Um, but they're all talking about strategy being this thing that can happen at any, like I was saying, strategy is fractal, right? It's like you have a large scale strategy, but within that you have nested strategies down to the idea that at an individual level, the lessons of James Clear and the individual productivity gurus, those are all about personal energetic strategy and focus. The focusing of my attention to achieve a limited set of goals that I have prioritized over other things over a period of time. I think of that as basically the same thing as a flight chief deciding how much they are going to constrain the attention and time of the people in their care, in their charge, as the same thing as the the NDA, the National Defense Strategy, um, which is the allocation of the resources at a national level to a limited set of goals. It's the same thing. But the thing I run into is people are like, no, but what about the levels of war? The enlisted force structure dictates that a staff sergeant under no circumstances occupies the strategic level of war. Right? And people can't get past that. They're like, no, strategy is not for a staff sergeant. They do not engage strategically. They execute. But execution involves strategic thinking. It involves it involves the same type of decision making, which is why I think the levels of war have us all jacked up, like the way that we think about this.
Yeah, I think
Not,
they.
yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go. No, when you say that, I think people confuse it. They box these levels of war into like a certain idea in their head, not only like rank, position, title, rather than focusing on the competency and that. I think we get so caught up in just like saying that this is the thing,
Yeah,
and only this person can do this thing, and then we're gonna build so we can keep building people to do this one thing.
yeah,
That it can like the levels of war can be tactical, operational, strategic, whatever you want to name them, but you can also work in different realms of the tactical, operational, strategic level. Um, yeah.
so I was trying to formulate why this is the case. I think that what you're describing there, like our stuckness and kind of what I was trying to articulate, like our stuckness in this is the way it is. There's an objective view, and people within. I'm going to say that out loud in a second, DJ, because that's interesting. Um, I was thinking about it, and like I'm going to share. Let me see if this works. Right screen. Yeah, it does work. I'm going to spotlight because I'm sharing a Miro board. Actually, I'm going to share this Miro board with the group. If you're interested in digging around there, because Toga and I did some early reflection. That's not reversed for you, right? That's
No,
okay.
it's good.
It's reversed for me. I always get confused because Zoom reverses my view. Um, so one thing I was thinking about is I really like books like I really like The Goal. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I
No,
also
I need
really
to read
like
that one.
it's interesting. I learned about it through I learned about it because I read the Phoenix Project. And the Phoenix Project is basically applying a similar approach and lens to software design as you do to a factory floor. So Goldratt, the theory of constraints, applies in the hyper ordered domain of management as you get on a factory floor. I might have to get into Cynefin here in order to articulate this, but I'm I try and hold myself back from talking about Cynefin because I do it so much. Like I just obsessively drag everything into Cynefin. So I'm going to try and do it in a different way right now. So I really like the Phoenix Project, and I have the graphic novel version of The Goal. I understand the fundamental concepts, but it's basically that within this hyper-ordered domain, you can have a very high degree of constraint and determine what the primary constraints are and diagnose them and fix things. This is the Toyota production system. It's also very, very much in the scientific management realm of things, is that we are engineering our organization to achieve certain ends, and we are manipulating the shape of that, like the roles, the throughput, you know all these aspects are within our control, and we are isolating it from the environment in order to have that degree of control. So I also really like I have up here the book Emergent Strategy. I'm a big fan of this book, Emergent Strategy. This is much more in the like social like activism domain. So the author talks a lot about the strategies for like Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, these distributed networks where you have zero top-down control of the participants, and they are, they have their own activities, and sometimes they deviate, and so you end up with like, I don't know, Antifa going out and like changing the perception of your movement because they're having some activity over here. And like, how do you keep people aligned and like try and pursue your goals in this way more dynamic, way less constrained environment, right? So those are the where I see those are the two poles of this thing. So I was introduced to these two in the middle are two of my favorite books on strategy: Measure What Matters and Team of Teams. Team of Teams is about fostering some degree of emergence in sense making from your teams at the ground level, right? Who are sensing the environment and responding themselves. And there's like loose coupling to the top of the organization, constant communication up and down, but they're not dependent. Like they're not dependent on the top of the organization to say whether or not they can do something. In a factory setting, the ground level is highly dependent on the top of the organization to say whether it's within their role, right? So this is kind of the way I was thinking about it: is you've got a spectrum, top down to bottom up, right? And on that spectrum, it makes sense to go within our domain, right? Within our normal operations, which of these makes sense? So before we start doing the work of strategy, which is like the method that we use to determine what to do next, we have to decide which paradigm we're even operating in, which is which domain. And Kinevin, it would be, are we operating in an ordered environment or a complex environment, right? Team of Teams, the intro to that, and why adopting a more mission command bottom up, pushing autonomy to the lowest levels made sense for the Iraq War when it didn't make sense for wars prior. The intro to that is super good, the first few chapters. So this was like my first thought was choosing your posture and paradigm, but then also, does your posture change as conditions change? Because when you start to see signals that your posture is too rigid, is too constrained, do you let up? Do you change your approach? In getting people to be strategists, in my view, it doesn't start with, and maybe this is wrong, it doesn't start with what are the methods, like here's the joint planning process, use this, or here's the OODA loop, or here's OKRs. I have taught a lot of people OKRs because I think they depict a really interesting view that can be applied differently in different contexts. But I do think it's worth noting, one of my big critiques of the Air Force and PME in general is that we seem to think that we're supposed to train everybody to use the exact same approach across the entire organization, when that makes zero sense, because a finance squadron should operate fundamentally differently from a special operations squadron.
Yeah.
Just fully differently. So how does PME prepare people for adapting to the environment that they're in?
Well, I mean, PME in general is inherently set at what does it mean to be a soldier? What does it mean to be an airman? What does it mean to be a guardian?
Yeah.
When I think about PME, and I think we're at two different we're at a very weird spot with PME, right? I went to senior NCOA on the Air Force side, and it was a lot of, you guys are senior NCOs, but we need to teach everybody here what great power competition is. And then that's what we spent the entire time on. And then it was really spent on how does each of your AFSC tie to how you're going to affect great power competition, rather
Yeah.
than what does it mean to be an airman at this level and then leading in the air domain, and then what does the air domain bring to great power competition, and then how do you plug into that. I'm very interested to hear how the people who just graduated the fellowship model, I've talked to a few of them already. But I think also on the Intel side, we've been living and breathing that for as long as you've been in Intel. So when you go and you start, you have other people telling you about great power competition, you're like, well, this has been my life ever since I've put on the uniform.
So yeah, and I think what you just brought up as far as like, oh, we're gonna make we're gonna make it all about great power competition. I think that's good, but DJ put in the chat. I said I was gonna bring it up, and I think it's super useful. DJ put, I think senior NCOs have played a large role in telling our junior NCOs they only execute versus strategically think. So to enhance our NCOs, we have to work at making our senior NCOs better. I would say this ties into when I talk to people about making people strategic at the lowest level, many people think I'm just talking about making people aware of the strategy that they fit into, which doesn't make strategy their purview. It just makes it something that they align to, right? You are
Yeah.
still just executing. But when they think we're making airmen strategic, they just think we're making them aware of the higher level national defense strategy and how they fit into it, which is the opposite of what I'm proposing, which is being strategic means changing your behavior, not just how you interpret your behavior. Like it means I'm actively sense making, not I'm doing the exact same thing, but now I'm thinking about China and the domains of warfare like the economy and soft power in addition. That to me is not being strategic. Just having knowledge of how you fit in is not what I talk about when I say strategy. So this idea of making NCOA all about infusing this knowledge of the higher level strategy doesn't make people strategic. It just makes them more aware of the strategy of people above them, right?
Yeah, I think that goes back to where they're, I think they're starting at somewhere, but it goes back to your initial point of it's not about the execution at this point. It's getting people comfortable with the fact that, oh, this is why you kind of do what you do when you do it. Getting people to internalize that was kind of we had we had many hour-long discussions during my Project Mercury cohort on enlisted international affairs. And I just had a briefing last week in some spaces with some DIA folks about some secondary things that came from my cohort that I went and briefed them about, and they're like, how do we one of their things that they needed to be able to teach them was basically the same things that they taught the officer FAOs and the everybody going, not only how do you tie to the strategic level, but how when you make a decision or say something or do something, what does that actually impact? And
Yeah.
what's the meaning of that? And I think that's where the difference is. It's the knowing, and then there's the actual like doing of it.
Yeah. When I think of like what I was thinking, I would consider somebody who has no knowledge of great power competition, but is actively working on the sense making with their team. Like, let's talk about that, a flight chief at a finance squadron. um, who is actively thinking about how they can improve their practices, maybe applying principles of, you know, OKRs, or, like theory of constraints within their environment. Because I think when you're talking about a finance flight, you are talking about a much more predictable, policy constrained, ordered environment. But there's also aspects that are unordered, like how they, as a sense making entity, that flight influences policy, influences the allocation of resources to them. I would consider that flight chief the one who is actively thinking about what is our capacity, what is the effect we're trying to have, are we achieving it, and what's our next best step to achieving that. I would consider that person orders of magnitude more strategic than the flight chief who is reading the national defense strategy and, like, memorizing its basic points. That person's not strategic, they just have some knowledge. To be strategic, in my view, is to be engaged actively in the world that you occupy, sense making, changing course, right? And I just brought up one way I've been thinking about strategy as an activity, right? As like an embodied in a space activity, rather than just an artifact that's handed down that we learn about, or something that we align ourselves to. And I'm gonna share
I
that
think
really.
what
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think what you
Yeah,
just said though, no, what you just said though is it made me think of, I get your point now from earlier. If what I'm hearing is you are saying more or less the strategy is the thing, the sense making, the thing that you're doing versus the knowledge. So it's almost like I'm a huge tabletop board game fan. So it's the difference between playing the game, making moves, and figuring out how to win the game versus just reading a rule book or watching a YouTube video about somebody explaining the board game.
Yeah. Or even like knowing about the background of the people who designed the game and what they were thinking when they made it.
Going that
That,
next layer
yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think playing the game is strategy. Sorry, Ethan, it looked like you were about to jump in.
I was, and now my daughter has broken into my room. So, I, I love Richard Rummel here. Good strategy, bad strategy, the crux.
Yeah.
Like focusing, the ability to choose what to focus on and to have an idea of what provides leverage in the environment, which isn't purely analytical or pure execution, but is something. Where's the cat going? He's running away from you, I think.
Should I bring him downstairs with us?
Trying to understand that strategic thinking is adding context before deciding an action.
Yeah.
And right, it isn't just like adhering to a rule book or like setting down, if you're playing Settlers of Catan, it's not like I'm gonna just invest in wheat and ore the whole time and never do anything, right? Like there are elements of leveraging your capacities, but it's also evolutionary in its like it has to be informed by context.
Yeah.
In present and future moments, right? That sentiment, right? I agree with Daniel. It's not just reading somebody else's rule book and going, okay, I get the strategy, and then following it dogmatically or blindly. Like it is, I think it's constantly trying to add your own perspective and things that you can sense and see. So like sense making is good. I don't know that I think sense making is an element of strategy.
Yeah.
That like fuses and the Akoff sense, like there's synthesis and analysis. I really like his view of, synthesis adds the context, analysis, is the sort of breaking things apart, scientific method, reductionist thinking. Strategy for me feels like how to use both analysis and synthesis to achieve your own aims, right? It's like, how do you fulfill your purpose? That feels like strategy, but But going back to the NCO, like what are my interests is not a hierarchical command and control sentiment. So like, again, going back to ACOF, like the biological model or the mechanical model of the organization that says like the strategy comes from the head and the arm is just it doesn't have independent sense making. Well, tell that to your arm when you touch a hot stove, like how much of your first person thinking decided to recoil. Right. So there's, I think that involuntary, right, that's a life preserving strategy. So I think that there are important elements, like if you can infuse strategy down to the deepest level of an organization, it's potentially much more effective.
Yeah, you just reminded me I don't have a book on here on this Miro board, which is, if you're familiar, is The Starfish and the Spider. Which is a really great resource on, like I was talking about at first, picking your paradigm. I think a lot about, so this is all about it, like distributed consciousness, right? So Team of Teams is all about distributing the consciousness of the organism out to the arms, right? Like an octopus. An octopus has independent neurology and action happening in all of its tentacles. They don't ask permission of the central brain to behave in certain ways. There is a fusion of action that occurs, but it is very different from the way that we think about it, which is top down. The brain decides and then things happen. But even that, like the centrality of the brain and cognition is a bit of a myth. So, this is where we get into embodied cognition, which I'm a big fan of. But I'm glad you brought up Richard Rumelt, because I think that idea of execution, this is a quote that because I've been reading Richard Rumelt finally. Good strategy, bad strategy, good badagy. Good badagy, strategy, badagy.
There you go.
Yeah. He says, and this is one of my favorite things from early in the book, is he says that bad strategy ignores the power of choice and focus, trying instead to accommodate a multitude of conflicting demands and interests. So the keywords here to me are they're accommodate, and then like demands and interests, which would be the demands and interests of people who do not occupy the positionality that you do, right? So one of the things that I think the top-down view of strategy, that from a top-down, there is simply the sense making that occurs at the top and then the execution that occurs at the bottom. One of the things that it misses is that a majority of the sense making that happens in an organization is not from the top. It is from the margins, right?
Yeah.
So a person, and this is actually ties into my TEDx that I did at Hickam about values informed execution, which is, yes, you execute, but you execute with knowledge of the desired effect. And when it is not going to achieve the desired effect, you deviate, even though the rules might say it's not your job to deviate. You want your organization to do that, right? So
it's the same one where you made the analogy about the walking on the grass, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and if we don't do that, if we don't create command space for people to decide for themselves whether, at my context, that nobody in Congress or nobody with stars on their shoulders could possibly know about, they do not know about my context, and there is no way that they could know about my context. At my context, I have to understand the intent, commander's intent. We're talking about mission command. And I have to deviate if I come up with information that they didn't have that says, oh, you thought that I was going to do it this way. Actually, I'm going to do it this other way. And that's going to achieve your intent. That is like conflicts with the military and the scientific management concept. Scientific management is, we can we can articulate all of the ways in which people might do their jobs, and we can standardize it, and we can get everybody to do it the same way and make it more and more efficient, right? That's fine in a factory setting. That there is actually an appropriate place for that. Although I shouldn't overly endorse it, because it also proves really problematic when you don't incorporate the fact that you don't control everything, and human welfare actually matters a lot to efficacy. Like,
Yes.
you want your people to thrive. Sorry. Which is also like another thing that I think, when we do go about empowering, for example, flight chiefs, I think we will find ourselves in a situation where they are making it much more their business to consider the thriving of the people in their charge. Because I think when you have the whole "not my job" mentality, then it's like, it's similar. Like, I've talked a lot about my experience with EFMP and almost being separated from my family when my daughter was dying, and all of this. And I encountered a lot of "not my job." And I think it was a way for people to protect themselves from feeling bad about being complicit. Right? It was like, oh yeah, it sucks that you're going to have to quit in order to stay with your dying daughter, and then she won't have health care. Or you're just going to have to live away from her while she dies and just hope she doesn't die while you're gone. And I don't feel empowered, because it's not in the AFI to deviate, to interdict, to actually, care. And caring is actually worse for me, So I think that people tend to lean on this because it kind of protects them a little bit.
I've read a lot of your stuff and watched a lot of your videos, and I mean, it still to this day, it hurts my heart what you've gone through. I'm also EFMP as well. My oldest, she was born a micro preemie, 1 pound, like lots of things, and
Yeah.
in Germany, and then but the connection of just individuals. I mean, that's a huge thing of huge thing of mine, and Chang there. Like, we talk about not only connection all the time, and a lot of the things that we're trying to do on the Space Force side. And when we get into even like strategy or I'm a big fan of what I coined with my thesis chair in my thesis, loosely coupled communications environments, and how we communicate in digital realms, like everything from Slack to Merc to you name your way that you're having conversations. It's all about the connection in those.
Yeah.
And the key tenet of Mission Command is trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
I despised the idea that it's constantly being taught to. Last I saw it was at like the command, or the air. One of the courses the officers on the Air Force side go to command
Like
staff college
ACSC.
about.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
about assured trust. I'm like, I don't like the term assured trust.
Yeah.
Like, you just can't assume that trust is going to be there. And that it's amazing how something a specialist for or senior airman types into a chat window gets to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and how fast that is. I think we have to get to, like, really your point there is, and I can show you some of the diagrams that I put together. I don't know if I can drop them in your Miro board, but I can share them.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see
Well,
here.
yeah, be aware that I'd like this video to go out, to the community.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, yeah, just be aware of that.
I think I can just share. I know I don't even get the button down. Oh, if I put it out here, let's see. All right, can you see?
Yeah, I got it.
Let's see here. And I think I can even do the all right, so this was pretty much one of the things we talked about, the coupling, right?
Yep.
So I really dove down into like what loosely coupling is and all the effects of what a loosely coupled organization is, and you kind of have the 5 outcomes of persistence, which is really stability, buffering, adaptability, satisfaction, effectiveness, and what loosely coupling does for an organization. And then further broke that down into, okay, what actually do we have when we start talking about these chat rooms where we do operations or do anything like so like what ConversaCore is doing with their 8 arena on the humanitarian side with humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, is it's a loosely coupled organization but highly aligned policy.
Mhm.
And when we dive into it, you can't have mission command unless you have a highly aligned, loosely coupled organization. And with your example, I don't think a finance organization, they're highly aligned
Mhm.
and highly coupled
Yeah.
organization. They're not going to really do effective mission command in the sense that their organization will, but I think their organization as a whole can plug into a loosely coupled organization that can execute mission command. Because they're still going to have some of the same tenets, trust, shared understanding, flat organization, vertical horizontal integration. And I think there's like two new ones that aren't on here by the time I wrote this.
Yeah.
And I kind of
It-
said that the only way to have decision advantage was to have the mission command to be able to do effective intelligence and information advantage.
yeah. I've been thinking about I've been thinking a lot about the finance airman as an example of like maybe the most constrained environment I can think of in the Air Force, because there's so much limitation there in terms of the systems that they use, the things that they are able to, it's a very highly constrained environment. It's about as close as you can get to like an ordered environment within the Air Force. But one of the things that I think about is I remember when I started studying commercial practices and strategy, um, I realized that in a competitive market, somebody who's doing that kind of job, like a bank employee, um, they in the competitive environment, how happy the person they're interacting with matters to them. And it's because they're in a competitive
Yeah, I
environment.
can agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally different from I have dealt with great, nice finance airmen before, 100%. Like I have encountered them, but I think that was a personality aspect. I do not think that was in the same way um, sort of imbued into them that our job is customer service, and customer service involves making the people you're interacting with happy with the interaction. So, and then my question, and that's where this type of environment deviates into the complex, because now we're talking about how do I sense where this person is at, and through interaction determine how we can move forward together, or at the very least, if this is outside of my power, how can I make sure that they come to me next time so that I can solve their problem? Because I can tell you that I almost never walk into the FSS, and part of the reason is because I expect and not my job attitude, because of some people, not everybody,
And
right? So this
yeah,
affects this affects a lot of things. So even in the highly constrained, finance airman context, there are aspects of complexity that require somebody to do advanced sense making interaction with highly emotionally charged individuals and help them navigate, are you going to come back to me next time you have an issue?
This
Right.
and I
this
think
feels
that's, oh no, go.
deep
Yeah.
deeply related to something that I've been lecturing on, which is so much of our world is built on like the presumption of linear behavior, such that the one person in that finance group who is personable gets more work than everybody else. And so they learn very quickly that like, oh, well, being nice is first order positive for me in terms of workload, without recognizing that like second order it would be right, the like once everybody kind of resolves some of these things, if we have a little bit of investment, like the long-term view, the strategic view rather than the like tactical view, is that if more people care, the problems that we are dealing with slowly go away, or like they're not as acute. But the short distance is, if that is applied, the number, right, people will start to go to FSS more, right? This is like what is it, Jen Palka in Recoding America, like they finally fixed the glitch with the VA application system, and there's more applications than the next rung of the ladder can deal with. Because, and they're like, break the system again, because we can't take we can't deal with this number of applicants. So that, there is something there about local optima and the ability of strategy to overcome first order negative, second order positive, right? Like that feels strategic in a way that like, if I do a little bit of investment, I am going to get some short-term pain, but for long-term gain, right? And this goes back to the whole like two marshmallow, can I delay gratification? Is that strategically, right? That feels like that's an important part of strategy, is the ability to think what happens after what happens next, and to like delay my reward center from just like firing constantly.
Yeah, I mean, all of this makes me think about connection again. My big thing is, I think we got to the point that teams of teams, since you brought it up, they basically, the first quarter of that book is about how they became so efficient. And I think that's what we've done with our Air Force, is we've become so efficient with our AFSC model that when somebody comes to us, we don't need to do our job or we don't need to do that, because we are so efficient at our job in our lane only. And that's why on the Space Force side, if I was king for the day, I would make more touch points. I would make more like 5-7 level schools. I would make more times where we get all of our guardians together in one area, where my intel guy knows enough cyber stuff, that he knows enough space stuff, that when we start doing things in the space domain, I want somebody who understands the space domain as like their degree, and then their career field is like their major, and any specific thing inside of that career field would be like their minor. But I want everybody to understand space first. And I think if you get to that, and more people understand everybody's stuff, you have a stronger connection. So when somebody comes to you and be like, hey man, I really would like you to do this, they're like, okay, I think I could do that, rather than that's not my job.
Yeah, it's win as a team, lose as a team, rather than, and like this decomposition down to individual, measures of performance, and whether you are efficiently carrying out your job, and those are the measures upon which you are promoted, has led to this sense that we succeed as individuals, whether or not we fail as a team. I can succeed and do great and get promoted even if my team fails, right? Even if as a unit we fail to instill the trust of those units around us or the airmen around us, I can still get promoted to the highest levels and make money. And actually, the kinds of behaviors that get me that promotion might be worse for team success. It's the super chickens problem, right?
Yeah. That's why I mean, There's some things coming out on the Space Force side that I can't talk about yet that I'm actually extremely glad we're doing and going down and will do. But I mean, even some of the things like that we got rid of, like we got rid of the stratification. That is probably the biggest reason I jumped from the Air Force to the Space Force.
Yeah, that's
Was
huge.
like, oh great, you're not going to force me to compete against my peers in a cutthroat environment while also telling me this at the same exact time, you need to be a team. And
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
it doesn't work. And things like getting rid of the patches that tell you that I'm this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so glad that we're not allowed to have those. Like, I the more you start separating your organization into I'm this is when you get to the things that, oh, I'm this. I can't help you. That's not my job. Like, this
Yeah.
is what I get paid to do. Like, no, this right here is what you get paid to do. Like
Yeah.
on your
For sure.
uniform. So
Yeah, I wanted to bring this. We got just, I don't know, like 15, 20 minutes left. I wanted to bring this back to a concept that I've been thinking about. Like, what is the essence of strategy? Having read a lot of, a lot of things on strategy. My favorites being like, I really like Richard Rumelt so far. Some of my favorite thinkers really like Richard Rumelt. Good strategy, bad strategy. That's why I've finally picked it up. I do really like Team of Teams, and Wardley mapping is something that has heavily influenced the way that I think about strategy. Um, also Fifth Discipline has been really influential on me, because it kind of helped me understand this concept of, as an organization, we invest in changing our capacity in order to achieve the goal, right? So that concept of innovation being an aspect of our jobs, where, something that was mentioned earlier made me think those people who go above and beyond and are constantly trying to improve their workspace and stuff, they're outliers. They're not seen as operating within the confines of what is expected of their role. Whereas if we changed the way we thought about team performance, it would make those kinds of behaviors an obviously essential aspect of every team, right? Whereas, but which is what the fifth discipline does. It causes you to think about how, as an organization, are we intentionally evolving, and what practices are we engaging in that cause us to evolve, right? But either the way we think about our jobs or our individual capacities, or are we using theory of constraints to improve our, whatever. We are constantly, at both the team level and at the individual level. How can I be better as an individual? How can we be better as a team? But the essence of strategy, I really liked it being like determining what we're trying to do, the effect we're trying to have, and then how we're focusing the capacities we have on achieving that effect, on achieving that value or that impact, right? So that can go a couple of different ways. There can be a couple of different approaches to this. I can determine effect and change my capacity to achieve it, but in a lot of cases, it is recommended, especially by those who are operating in the complexity domain, like the complex domains, to go, what are my actual capacities and what are reasonable effects to try and aim for? So that's like determining the evolutionary potential of the present and going, what's in the adjacent possible for who we are now? What's the best investment, right? Is
can you
it
break down
change who we are?
capacity?
Capacity?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just mean like who we are and what we're able to do. So it's like internal capacity. It is, a team might be like, we have these skills. So a really common strategic approach is to go, what are our strengths? Does it make sense for us to try and be a software development company when none of us know how to code yet? In the entrepreneurial space, you do this a lot because you're like, we're trying a thing. It turned out we were really good at this one aspect of it. And then we pivoted to only doing that. And that's when we started making money. That is a very common story. It is, we thought
Okay.
we were going to do this thing, but it turned out we weren't good at that thing. We were good at this other thing. And so we pivoted to make goals coherent with capacity, right? That can also be like, so the way Wardley mapping works is you look at your goals, your capacities, and the environment. It focuses heavily on the environment, right? I really like Wardley mapping because it's like, what are all of the technological dependencies for us to achieve this? And how might they change, right? So you have these like climactic patterns, and the ways that things tend to shift, and you try and anticipate those, and you change your strategy to, you know, yeah, I follow Rob Schneider. Maybe not on Substack though. That's a good tip. Sorry, I'm reading the chat while I'm trying to talk. Wordly mapping has you reflect on all three of these things at once, right? And then you go, what investments would make the most sense to potentiate alignment between all those things, right? We have do we have the capacities we need to achieve our goals? Do we have to change our capacities? Are our goals reasonable based on the capacities we have? And how's the environment and stuff going to change, right? VMCL is a strategic approach that I really like, which is from the DRSRP systems thinking method. So the book Flock Not Clock from the Cabreras is a good example of using this. It's very reductive, where you're like, what's our vision and our mission? This is what Austin and I taught to Vossler, was VMCL, because it's a really good intro to, we say we want to achieve this. We say we're going to do this to achieve that. That's the mission. What capacities would we need in order to do that? Do we have those? If not, what's our investment? You know, how do we focus attention, money, time, etc. And then the third one was like fifth discipline, and how that factors in is just that it has us reflect ceaselessly on that internal capacity and how we're evolving it. So those are just three things I wanted to highlight as far as like methods of thinking about strategy as at any level, at the individual level, at the national level. Strategy is simply matching capacity to effect. It can be focusing capacity, choosing what our capacity is going to be, can be investing in changing capacity. It can also be about, you look at strategy, national defense strategy that perceives that one of our strategic advantages in the United States is technological, is Silicon Valley and the other, sort of hubs of technological evolution. And how do we make our strategy, militarily, politically, nationally, how do we use that to our advantage? So, it's not, we didn't have these things and now we're trying to get them. It's, what do we have, and how do we make it amount to advantage?
I would love to do two things. I know we have like 10 minutes left. I'm interested in people's hot takes on the A staff, A1, A2, A3, right, or J staff, J1, J2, J9. Like, there is an aphorism from Drucker that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I prefer the Adam Sandler, you eat pieces of shit for breakfast. So, I think strategy still matters, even in the context of culture. But what about structure eats culture for lunch? And kind of like how, if you want the staff sergeant to be thinking strategically, is the organization that we've inherited from the 1940s also a big broken thing, or is it redeemable? And I'm curious, people, again, hot takes.
I wrote like my whole end of my bachelor's was that thing on habitus and how it's affected by like, and one of the things I cited was our 17th century division of officers and enlisted is, like the officers and enlisted as a paradigm came from feudal lords marshaling their vassals to, because the king needed a And the fact that we're still operating in this paradigm, it worked well in like the scientific management, because you have a managerial class and you have a, you know, a laboring class, right? And they were separated. It, in my view, it makes just zero sense. And I, as much as I do not like Safi Bakal's from Loonshots, his structure eats culture for lunch, because I think he suggests that you can structurally generate culture, and I think that's bullshit. It's taken too far there. I do think it very obviously, like, you look at Conway's law and team topologies, culture affects, or structure affects a lot, right? And so I tend to agree. Like, I don't know if you were like just trying to get me to agree that this is all nonsense, but
well, but I mean, it sort of goes back to the team of teams. I mean, the Pentagon loves to just reorganize, right? That like that idea that structure is the thing that we can get to a piece of paper and we can write down a new organizational structure. Or if you've seen, Russell Akoff say, like, why is every organization, look like it does? And it's because that's how we can draw it on a piece of paper.
yeah.
So we don't have 3 or 4 or n-dimensional loosely, right? This like loosely coupled, or, how can I have an informal network that lays over top of my formal network? But yeah, I think I'm mostly interested in the view of strategy, which is, I can both take in the whole cosmos and look through a microscope. Like, there is an insane amount of complexity that I could consider.
Yeah.
How do I know what should be in my lane? And when do I decide to deviate from that compliance? And when do I say, well, that's not my job yet? Or, right, like, I'm supposed to be the vassal who is just the tip of the spear. And like,
I'm gonna let Will go next, because I did just jump in and rant, but this gets back to the first thing that I said, which is, as I thought about this, it came back like a lot over the last few weeks. It came back to that question of giving people the ability to know that there is a choice to be made about what paradigm you're operating in. And there is a point at which Atul Gawande, checklist manifesto, there are environments in which hierarchical, also dawn of everything, in seasons of abundance you're egalitarian, in seasons of scarcity you are hierarchical. Super interesting and makes perfect sense to me, right? It is. And that is to say, like, it's domain dependent, but giving people the capacity to understand that it is on them to a certain degree to make the choice about what paradigm they're going to use, and it might change. The reason I brought up Checklist Manifesto is because he tells a story of Hurricane Katrina and Walmart, regional management telling individual stories to do whatever it took to help people. There's also a story in the Mission Command 1-1 that's just, the order was help Americans. That was it, right? There are times at which you simply cede control to the local. You're like, no, you're facing a chaotic circumstance. You're facing a super complex time. I cannot tell you how to act now. It's on you. And giving people the understanding that it's going to be on them to decide when the people in their charge, when it's time to go. I don't know, you're dealing with a really problematic customer. I do not have a checklist for you. You are going to have to develop the skills to surf in this circumstance. And we have to make sure everybody has that capacity when the time comes to deal with an irate colonel who is screaming at a finance airman. You need to be able to surf in that circumstance, because that's how we achieve mission success. And you're going to have to change your paradigm when that time comes. And that's like the foundational. There's a choice to be made about what paradigm I'm operating in based on circumstances. Sometimes it's a checklist. Sometimes it's, what is my job? And then other times it's, I'm surfing now, right? Sorry, Will, it's your turn.
No, I mean, that's great. I mean, I've learned so much from both of you. And so I like that because you're basically you're teetering on competencies, like a lot of things that I've done in my career. Like I didn't know what I didn't know until I needed to use it like 5 years down the line. And I think that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to get people, give them the tools and the competencies. I mean, that's what Project Mercury does, right? It gives you the tools and the competencies to hopefully, when a time comes, you know how to put a team together, get the band back together, and go do your thing, right? So that's great. I think that's good to talk about the A staff. I mean, Space Force living it, right? We tried to do our own thing. We're slowly breaking back out into the Napoleonic construct. But there's something to say, Ethan, you kind of said it, is having a formal network like an A staff, S staff, J staff, but that informal network is probably key. The big things, I keep using the word facilitator. I need to change it in digital spaces, maybe something like portfolio strategist or something. But it's literally having the people that can see down every silo across every network that can not only connect the boundary brokers and the network brokers, but be that people. I mean, it's one of the things that we learned from the 9/11 Commission, why ODNI is a thing, why NCTC and all these other groups where we put everybody in a organization together to figure out things, because everybody brings a different ingredient to bake that pie together. I think it's necessary because at the end of the day, somebody needs to hold that stick. Somebody needs to have the final say where they can't just push it off. But then you also need the person to be like, hey, I know this person's doing this thing, this person's doing this thing. You guys need to go talk. And then same thing, somebody's just weather watching the entire staff, and being able to be like, oh, do you guys realize that you're all doing the same thing here? Or do you realize that this person has a problem that you can fix? Let's put them together because everybody's focused on their things. There's so many times that, especially at the Pentagon, I've gone to the food court and just had lunch with somebody from like the A26, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing this thing." I'm like, "That could solve this person's problem over here that I just had a meeting with today. Let me just go back and hook you both up on Teams, and then go solve your problem together." And then you're done. But without really building those competencies into our people of what does facilitation mean, what does collaboration mean, what are the theories behind it, and how do you get somebody to start thinking like that? Um, that's something I haven't figured out yet. And I'm trying. But
Yeah,
I mentioned Rob Snyder in the chat, and I have been really enjoying his work recently on demand detection, which is to say, like, what are the external things asking us to do versus what internally are we seeing as our problems, but nobody's asking us to fix. And so it's sort of this like, I don't know. I've heard probably the best parable on what is the military designed to do from Dave Blair, which is like where it's the United States insurance policy. Like, we hope we don't have to execute on it, but if we do, we definitely want coverage. And so just trying to understand again, like, what are the demands? And this goes back to like efficiency, effectiveness, and how, if there's not a demand for strategy at every level of the organization, that capacity feels like it will atrophy, right? Because it's not being demanded. I just want to say two quick things. One, the like individual who thrives despite team performance degradation, and that like we promote, those people can be promoted. Like, I feel like that is the to a T definition of cancer cell, like grows independently of the environment, and you're like, man, you are kicking ass at growing. Like, that's the thing I think is most important at the atomistic cellular level is growth. So I'm going to reward that. Like, so I would love, I'm going to see if I can pull that little metaphor into some of my teaching, because Like, how can you be a team player and like don't just be a cancer? That's, you know, that's individually leveraging it's not an effective strategy. I think the second thing that I've held in my hip pocket is mechanisms always deteriorate through repetitive use. And if we
Yeah.
have an idea of a mechanistic view of our organizations, then the things that we do the most they wear out the fastest. I think biology gives us a different view, which is the things I use more become stronger. And like, how can I imbue that lesson to, again, if we can come back to the punching bag of the finance troop, that like, if I learn how to be a better, human resource, if people want to come back to me, like that strength that I'm building isn't going to wear me down. I think it's going to make me stronger. But I think there's some fear that, again, that first order positive of, if I'm more effective at my job, more people will come to me, and that's going to overwhelm my plate, or like overwhelm my capacity, my current capacity, that like the capacity breeds effects, outcomes, that loop. How can we as community holders, as educators, as stewards in the community, help people with an upward spiral rather than a 9-inch nails downward spiral?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen the cancer cell nested system overpowering the goals of the system it occupies, in Nicola Rehani's The Social Instinct, as well as David Sloan Wilson's This View of Life, which is about group evolution rather than individual evolution. And it speaks a lot to, one of the things is, when you have a system as contained, as constrained, and as much of the system is isolated from the environment as a large bureaucracy, like like the Air Force is, I think that you lose the capacity of evolution towards goals, because you can only evolve with contact with the environment. You can only evolve for an environment that you are in contact with, right? So the more insulated you are from the environment, the less capable you are of evolution. So, when I think of like the A staff as an ordered system intended to serve this ordered function for the bureaucracy, that is appropriate to a degree, but if it is not actively pulling information from the environment in that tells it how to evolve, then it becomes, it becomes a negative force, or one that just, like a tumor, just keeps pulling nutrients in for its own purposes, rather than serving the larger goals as a functional, because organs are supposed to have functions for the larger organism. So yeah. Well, you got one more thing before we call it?
No, I mean, I appreciate the invite to this. And then, just like almost every time I ever talk to Ethan, I now have a list of more books I need to need to read. So
Yeah, that happens around here.
Only
All right.
Daniel is better read. Only Daniel is better read.
I doubt it. All right. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you all for showing up. This has been a nice way to spend my Sunday. So I'm going to invite Toga in whenever he's rested up and recovered, to discuss what he thinks we need to discuss after he reviews the material of our conversation so far, so that we can, rather than rehashing things that don't need to be rehashed, we can kind of move the conversation forward. But keep an eye on Agitare channels. If you have ideas for Agitare events, please don't hesitate to let me know. But y'all have a great week.
Yes,
I
you as well.
appreciate it.